welcome to everybody here, and welcome especially those joining us via live stream. And if you're joining us on Sunday morning, or if you're watching this later, you've wandered into a presentation on the integration of Shrine Mont camps. And this has been a labor of love going back to when I was in seminary and going back even further, and I'll talk a little bit about that. If you're here and present, you have a copy of the article that I've written for Anglican and Episcopal history. I ask that please keep that to yourself. Don't share it with a rival journal or anything, because it hasn't published quite yet, So if you were looking to make your break, you're getting a proof copy of it. But this Anglican and Episcopal history is the historical magazine for the Episcopal Church that is doing a whole journal issue this fall on the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. So all of the articles will be something along the subject of having to do with the consequences of that Supreme Court decision. And so I've actually wrote this article when I was in seminary, which is 2017, and I had always kind of been touching it up, and I'd submitted it for publication before, and I've never heard back. And then when they announced that they were doing this article, I kind of revamped it and looked at it again. And so this is always the type of thing where it's been a labor of love, but it's also been something I'm glad that's finally reached fruition, and it'll see the light of day. You can subscribe to the Anglican and Episcopal history for a very reasonable membership fee, and it's available online. It's available in a print copy. I also serve as a reviewer for the journal, so I review other books, and so it's a way of scratching that itch that all of you are well aware of, that I have as a lover of history. And so I'll be upfront about that I'm not a professional historian. I wish I were, and in another life I would have been, but writing this article, 10 pages, I realized that maybe I shouldn't, It's hard work. Writing a book, writing this article is really hard. And so I'm glad I'm going to keep my day job. And I also say that I am not, to be a historian, you have to be without bias. And I am not without bias on this topic. These are my heroes right here. I grew up going to Shrine Mont camp, and I love Shrine Mont. I fully drank the Kool-Aid. People always say, it's like Shrine Mont like a cult? And I say, yes, and I'm a part of it, And so it was not a struggle to write this article, but it was, addressing this difficult topic of racial integration and how the diocese failed in its efforts and succeeded was hard, because this is the place and the people that I love, and they don't always look good. And so we'll enter into that today, but I just always start by saying that I am not an unbiased observer who is coming from the outside, who is looking to see this topic that I'm kind of came from. I also just claim I did not live through this time period of the 50s and 60s. Some of you did, and so I come at it from that advantage and that disadvantage. And so sometimes I've given this presentation at a couple other churches, and there are people who worked at Shrine Mont during this time period, or obviously who lived through integration, who remember all this. And so I'd love to hear your stories. And I don't know. I would say a limitation of this paper is, I didn't get all the facts. I didn't crack the code. I would love to have interviewed, the 15 people who integrated Shrine Mont. I never did. I would love to have more archival evidence and pictures and that sort of thing. And I tried. Over the last 6 years, I've tried. And so I'm hoping this will be an entree into this, and someone can write the story again. And maybe say where I'm wrong or say where I'm right, but this just gets it into the conversation. And one of the reasons why I wrote the article was because the people who lived through it were dying, or continue to die. And so I wanted to capture it and wanted to hear their memories and understand this, and so that's a part of it there. Just if you don't know, we're going to Shrine Mont in a couple weeks, and many of you, Shrine Mont is the diocesan camp and conference center for one of them for the Diocese of Virginia. It's located in the Shenandoah Valley, about 2 hours from here, Orkney Springs, Virginia, and has been a part of the diocese for about 100 years now. So that's some background on it. If you somehow don't know anything about it or anything what this picture is, this is from the shrine. And the neatest thing about Shrine Mont and camps in general is they're shrouded in legend. There's mystery. So, we can write the history of the church here and schools, and it's much easier to write because there's much more documentation. But camp, if you just think about it, there's just people don't write as much stuff down. You go there to get away from that sort of thing. And so, I remember going to camp and hearing that all these legends, falsehoods, about what happened. And that's a part of the myth of the place. And that's a cool part of the place, that you heard that Star Wars was filmed there, and like how if you go there and you're a child, you think that this is where Jesus died, like you have that memory. And that I'm a historian, I love the truth, but I think that's also true. Like you hear about the Judas Rock, how there were 12 stones there, and they were all this color, and then one of them turned that red. I've told that to thousands of people, hundreds of people. I've heard that that's not true, that stone was originally red, and so, but those are like the type of things that like the story is better than the reality. So there is a cross, on Shrine Mont property up the hill, and the cross burned in 1957. And until I did my research on this, I said, well, gosh, maybe there's some connection there with, that was right at the time that Shrine Mont was integrating, and I could find no evidence that, everyone I talked to said, I just heard that it burned, and so like there's all these, it would be a really interesting story if it were the other case. So I grew up going to Shrine Mont, and the hero of this story is a man by the name of Jim Lincoln, and I grew up going to camp with his grandchildren. And so Patrick, shout out to Patrick, he is a friend of mine. I was a counselor of his. And so the story that I always heard from Patrick was that Jim Lincoln was given the choice, he was the first director of St. George's Camp, that he could either integrate Shrine Mont or have it co-ed. Does that make sense? But he couldn't do both. So you could either have blacks and whites or boys and girls, but you couldn't have black and white and boys and girls, and so that's just kind of the central theme of the paper is race and sex, so really interesting topics. And so, yes?
So you're saying before 57, it was single sex, it was male?
Right, and all white. I'll get, yeah, and so, so he had this decision, and he decided, because he was an advocate for racial equality, he decided to make it single sex, all boys, black and white, and that was his courageous decision that he made against the diocese who wanted it to be all white, or, and so Patrick told me that when I was, I remember, 15 or something like that, and I've been hearing that story all my life, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to put that to the test, and so this is kind of the outgrowth of all that. And so it's been interesting. And so he gave me, he gave me or lent me this kind of Jim Lincoln was the director of Christian education at Shrine Mont. He worked in the Mayo House, and he ran the camps and everything. And once he left, he got this, and so this was like his goodbye. All these letters that everybody in the diocese sent him. And so you comb through this, and you're trying to find like the smoking gun of, like people to talk about it. And it's I always say it's very much, there are a lot of men of that time period who don't talk about their feelings very well, and so it's hard, like, to unearth that evidence is really, really hard. And this is kind of the story of all that and how it happened. Any more questions before I get started? There we go. Yeah, so I'm not in this picture. This is from the 70s, and at the shrine, so that's there. I'll talk about some of the people in there. And this is maybe a 1903 picture of Schreinemont, and way back, this predates Schreinemont, sorry. Schreinemont is just the village of Orkney Springs at this point, and you can notice there's this, the famous walkway in between the buildings, which, was it a wagon that knocked it over or something like that, so it no longer exists. And Orkney Springs is famous for its springs, and so people would go there for the medicinal quality of the springs, and you could go there and take hot baths and things like that. And it was never as, as fabulous as some of the other ones in the Shenandoah Valley, but it was famous. People would come in from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and take the railroad to Mount Jackson and then take a thing, and they would get healed, but it wasn't affiliated with the Episcopal Church at this point. And I think about this picture as, like you can think about it however you want to, but this white child is standing guard, for Orkney Springs and everything. And so here our story starts, just not to turn this into an APUSH class, but it starts with the Brown versus Board of Education and that decision which outlaws segregation in educational settings. And so the ripples from that start to take place, and the Episcopal Church and other churches in the Diocese of Virginia and other dioceses start having to say, okay, how is this legislation going to affect our schools, our camps and conferences, and our churches? And so there's de facto segregation occurs where, in essence, there's no rule, but churches are only white, right? And so you can figure out ways to do that. There's also de jure segregation where, by law, and so think about that difference, and you think about the Episcopal Church, and the national church is in support of it, and they're saying, okay, we're going to integrate our schools, and we're going to that'll filter into the camps as well. And this general idea that this is going to take place, and the language of the Brown decision is all deliberate speed, and so this is going to happen. It's going to happen right away, and anything about the American South, they said it's not going to happen that fast, and this idea of massive resistance takes place, and that's a stain on our history here. And so the Episcopal Church is operating in that context, where you have this national decision by the federal government and the Supreme Court, and then you have this church, which is politically powerful at the time, not the biggest church, but an important church, and they're trying to think of, what should I do in terms of segregation. The General Convention was scheduled to be held in Houston in that year, and I can't remember what exact year, it's in this time period, and they moved it because of the segregation laws in Texas. It's a really powerful thing. They moved it, get this, to Honolulu, Hawaii. So it was a great General Convention that year. All those things are happening in the diocese. Notice this little line here. No problem of race relations exists within the Protestant Episcopal Church except where individual members of groups create that problem. So that's kind of people, whistling past the graveyard. I almost said whistling Dixie, but basically saying, well, we don't have a race problem. There's no such thing. If these outside agitators, if these federal court decisions didn't make this, and we'd be living in, everything would be great. And so you can see the lost cause myth there taking place. And in Virginia, you have this specific thing, and in the Episcopal Church too, called the Virginia Way, and the concept of via media. And so in Virginia, we believe we're in the South but not of the South, or we're Southern but we're not like them, and them means Mississippi, Alabama, that sort of thing. And so we're more civilized than that. And so usually that means that we're going to maintain racist policies. We're just not going to shout them from the rooftop, or we'll change, but we're going to change in our time, in a mannerly way, a gentlemanly way. And so you start to integrate schools. I did this at St. George's in Arlington, and so this shows that process of integration. There was those integration moments in the state of Virginia, never quite, like Little Rock Nine or that sort of thing, but they were there, and they were painful, and they were hard in Warren County and in I'm going to forget them now. Albemarle County, the city of Charlottesville, and in Prince Edward County, there were big problems, and those school systems chose to close their public schools rather than integrate, and so you have this massive resistance, and then other places it kind of happened slowly but surely. There's the mayor of Alexandria leaving St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Alexandria because of race, and so this is all happening and bubbling up, and people are trying to sweep it under the rug at the same time. This is a map of Shrymont, and so again, like the school controversy is happening, the diocesan schools are slowly being integrated, and then you have camps which are kind of flying under the radar because camp exists out in the woods, and camp is, again, it's not documented as well, and so it can kind of act as a kind of a subterranean, subversive quality, and so camps are actually going to go a little bit quicker because of this. Is a map of Shrymont, and what happens is that this is the shrine. If you haven't been there, this is really confusing. If you have been there, it's probably still confusing, but you're having like this, how are we going to house these kids? And the law says that you can't have separate accommodations now. And people are very interested in having separate accommodations, oftentimes if the skin color is different. So like you have this, and the Shrymont Circle. Shrymont is just up here. This hasn't been bought yet, if you really know Shrymont. So what happens in 1949, this is before Brown, the Bishop of Washington, the Diocese of Washington, so outside Diocese of Virginia, they don't have a Shrymont, they don't have a diocesan camps program, so they are sending their kids to Shrymont, and this is a liberal bishop, Reverend Angus Dunn. They called him Black Dunn because he was pushing integration, and so he was sending their kids and their youth programs to Shrymont, and they wanted them to be integrated. And so, you're going to have this conflict, and especially because this is one of the things I discovered in my research, that Shrymont's biggest problem at that time wasn't the race problem, it was getting enough people to fill the beds, which is a recurrent problem in Shrymont's history, but and so the Diocese of Washington is actually funding a lot of Shrymont's programs, and so you can see in the evidence that they're actually like, well, we don't really love this integration thing, but they're paying the bottom line, and so we need to encourage them to come. Eventually, someone it kind of bubbles up, and people start figuring it out. And someone says, "Okay, there's going to be an African American clergy person who's coming down. What do we do?" Again, I'm trying to describe this given the thought process of that time. This historical and critical distance. We say, "This is how could they have made these decisions? This is awful." This is the church. At that time, it was really a hard decision. So they said, this was a private residence. This is Warner Cottage, and right across from the upper dining hall, and that was a private home at the time. And so that was owned by a Shrymont board member, so they'll put the black people there. Next time there was too many, and by that time they had bought the cottage, and so then they put them there. And in the Shrymont minutes, they're so dry. The driest minutes you've ever, I'm reading page after page after page, and all they're talking about is cottage repair, and this footpath is broken and everything, and then there's a line at the end. We accepted our first Negro, you use those terms, and there was no problems. I think that's what he said. There's no problems at that time, again, like the Virginia way of making sure that you don't want anything to bubble up, and so there they are, and then at the time, then all of a sudden, there's that picture. This is a new picture. It was just posted a few weeks ago. This is Gibson Cottage. And so this was taken 1955. And so, and you have an integrated group here. And notice that the age of the kids, later on in the story, will be okay for groups to be integrated if they're, under the age of teenagers or something. If they're, like young kids, it's fine. But if once they get older to dating age, then that's a problem. So I just wish I had 15 more photographs like that could tell the story. And Kurt Gibson, God bless him, at Shrymont is always saying, "Oh yeah, Charles, I got some documents for you. I'd love to see them." And still forthcoming, Kirk. There we go. So this is just a fascinating picture. I mean, it's kind of pixelated. You can't see it and everything. That's Jim Lincoln, my friend's grandfather here. He's the director of Christian education at the time. These are all the bishops right here, and he's sitting on the other side. And so he works in the diocese, and he doesn't look it, but he's like this rebel. He had been a forester, and he had been in parish ministry for a while, and then he gets this job in the diocese, and he's really going to push the envelope. And it's just, I'll just say it, all these white men, just amazing. You look at it, and you're just like, it's astonishing to look at this picture. But at the time, it was no thing, right? Lincoln starts to push for the idea that camps will be open to members of all races. So this is the Diocese of Virginia, not the Diocese of Washington. This kind of speaks to his, cool factor, right? Like he's hanging out with the staff. He's right here in the pipe, and this is 1963, I think. So this is before kind of the hippies and things like that. And that's the Shrymont that I remember growing up with, and that was in the 80s, it was just like hippie camp, and it's that subversive quality of it. And so there's Jim Lincoln, and an all-white staff there. Can't remember why I have this picture in here. Well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture. So this is Dottie Gibson, who is the wife of Churchill Gibson. Churchill Gibson, he was in that first photograph. He was the chaplain for many years at Shrymont, and he wrote the Shouting Prayer, which is this prayer inscribed at the base of this mountain, and that's all the Gibson family. The Gibsons are this dynastic Episcopal clergy family, and so if you get born into the family, you have to become an Episcopal priest. And so, this is Webster Gibson. He's the priest at Christ Church in Winchester. This is Kirk Gibson. He works for Shrymont. He's the one who was casting aspersions on, and that's like Churchill the Fourth and everything. I always feel like there's so much pressure on him, to become all that. So I interviewed, Dottie about this. She was a counselor when this was happening, and God bless her, her memory is fading, it's tough, to talk with her and try to get more out of her and everything. And one of the limitations of this project was combed these records, these minutes and everything, the stories I wish I had more of. So they start to do this thing and start to have integrated camps. It's okay, there's maybe a little bit of uneasiness, but, essentially it's okay. And then there's this backlash, and it's kind of like once they figure out, what's happening at camp? Wait a second, we're having black and white, and a number of clergy persons and lay people start to raise a stink, and this is happening concurrently with this concept of massive resistance that's going on in the diocese, or in the state of Virginia as a whole, and the school closures, and trying to push back against integration. So, and the constant solution at the time was that, again, was the idea of basically they didn't want blacks and whites intermingling at the teenage age. And, you could say you could have interracial conferences for children under the age of 12, that's okay, but interracial conferences for teenage youth of both sexes would not be permitted. And so in the classic Episcopal setting, the bishop says, we'll table this, or let's have a commission, let's have a committee, let's study this issue. And, everyone kind of meets at the next diocesan convention. And meanwhile, this petition goes around from a church in, it's not Keith Sinclair's church, but it's the one next to it in the Middle Neck of Virginia, Middlesex, Christchurch, Middlesex. And the petition basically says to all the churches in the diocese, do you know what's happening at Shrymont? They are having interracial conferences there. And so a couple churches, they talk about this. The rector stated that the applications for attendance at these conferences disclosed that the races would be mingled in the dormitories. He further stated that the policies by which men live together could not be divorced from moral and spiritual issues. Again, vestry minutes, very dry. But basically he's saying that's like this rector commenting on this other resolution is saying that, it's okay. I think this is a good thing that we're doing here. And so it's all bubbling up in anticipation of this convention that's about to happen. And there's a hero of the story, and there's always a villain. And the hero of the story is Jim Lincoln. The villain is, unfortunately, fellow VMI alumni, Chesty Puller, Lieutenant General, Marine Corps, just incredible military record. He enlisted at was age 18, was in every single conflict. Was that I don't know actually the exactness of his military record, but this gives an idea of it. And he was nicknamed Chesty, because he put his chest out, and it was just remarkable. Won the Navy Cross X amount of times and everything. He was retired at the time. And he was at this church in Middlesex. And he's the one who authored this resolution against interracial conferences. And so just fascinating that this man who was so brave could fight all across the country, and he was scared of black and white people mixing. It's just such a entree into the mindset of people. When I gave this presentation at St. Paul's in Alexandria, I didn't know it, but his daughter was in the audience, and it was astonishing. And his family is really famous. Lewis Puller wrote the book, Fortunate Son and everything, won the Pulitzer Prize, I think. And so what had happened at his church, it's a tiny church in rural Virginia, the rector's daughter, her name was Alice Coville, and she had come home from Shrymont, and I don't know if she was interviewed by the vestry, but I talked to her and I described it, and she said that people were jumping on tables and mad because they heard about what was happening at Shrymont, and they accused her of missignation, coupling with interracial, and she was like, I didn't even know what that meant, and so her father was a rector, and he was fighting with, can you imagine I think he was the senior warden at the time, can you imagine? I'm thankful for Christy, going one-on-one with this guy, and she said eventually they were pushed out, because he was in favor of this, and so you have this petition going around, and a lot of hearsay, a lot of this is happening, this is what's happening, and she said that people were climbing on the tables and all that sort of thing, and so they all there's his record. VMI, there we go. Not his daughter, sorry, the rector's daughter. Yeah, the rector's daughter. Yeah, yeah. The rector, yeah. The way his daughter, there's a lot of his, is described as like they made their lives miserable, and so they went to somewhere else. And so, of course, like the classic Episcopal Church decision is like, well, let's make a commission. And so they had this interracial group of clergy persons and lay people and black people, white people, and men and women. They all got together and wrote this report. And the report is pretty dry, and it's pretty long. And the solution was, we're going to offer both. And so, like, we're going to have interracial camps and racial segregated camps, like we're figured this out, and the unpublished minutes of that commission are really revealing, because the people are going at each other, and there's like these lawyers from Richmond who were really well connected in the diocese and in the public schools controversy, and there's other people, these champions of civil rights, who are also in their, by the end of it, they said, we can't come to a decision. The 16 of us in the room, I don't know how the whole diocese is going to come to a decision. And so they had this idea that we're going to have, two different camps that are run consecutively, and that never happened. That feasibly never happened. It was again like camps existing over here. It's just like it's never going to work. It's too hard to do that. So instead, our hero. This is like the timeline of this and all this stuff happening, and they start this new camp, which is integrated but single sex, and it's called St. George's. And here is this is Bishop Gulick right here when he was a counselor, and he was helping baptize. This is the old pool. He's helping, and of course, like in the course of my research, I would love if they would have, an African American sitting next to a Caucasian person. Don't have that, but you're guessing that this is a diocesan publication. They might not want to print that, and so they print this instead, which is great. So there's a dedication of Shrymont camps. There's the bishop and Jim Lincoln. Eventually, it became co-ed in 3 or 4 years, 6 years after that, 68, 69, it became co-ed. And the female camp happened at Roslyn, which is a different camp in Richmond in the diocese, and then eventually they kind of came together. So about 10 years ago, this is just as good a place as any to stop. The camps were 50 years old by that point. They were kind of decaying and decrepit, and this big campaign, the Shadow from Mountaintop campaign, and was to refurbish the cabins, but also provide scholarships for folks who needed money, and also scholarships to encourage a more diverse camp body. And so it met the campaign and exceeded it. And the good news, of course, is that Shrymont is integrated and everything like that. And, of course it is, but also that the percentages and statistics of people of color are still minimal, and that's partly because the statistics, the percentages of African Americans in the Episcopal Church are minimal. So that's it, I believe. Here's some discussion questions, but I'd just like to kind of open it up. We have a Shrymont lifer and resident here, Brooke Nunnally, who can provide. I started, Brooke, by talking about Patrick. Brooke and I were. Oh, good. Yeah, I was talking about Patrick and hearing that story when I was a kid about. Do you remember that? No. Okay. Yeah. Oh, neat. There you go. Yeah. Thanks.
What I'm finding interesting in your discussion of this very day is there's implicit racism.
Right.
The background to this, and it's really rising. I'm curious if your research discovered the theological justifications that the anti-integration
That's a really good question, and I cover it in the paper. There were none. They didn't appeal to that. They appealed to social and intellectual and logistical. It's like, this is not how the way we do things. This will cause problems like that. There was no, well, in the Old Testament, there wasn't any of that. It was, so for better, for worse, I think, and I cover that more in the paper, exactly how, because you think, how do you justify that? And you say, well, we're all going to hate it. This is against everything we've ever grown up with. That was it, rather than the moral or the biblical or whatever. Yeah, Bob.
In the context of this, when did the Diocese of Virginia ordain their first African American?
That's another really good question. That's another a really good story, and it's similar to you have historically black colleges and university. The diocese was the National Episcopal Church was ordaining African Americans back into the 19th century to serve only all black congregations. So we have we have in our prayer book they're in the lesser feasts and fasts now because they're incredible. Absalom Jones is the name. He was in Philadelphia, and so he was ordained, but it was like they literally called it the black desk. So there was a person on the staff who was in charge of African Americans in the congregation or in the diocese. And so it was a ministry that was completely separate, completely segregated. They would have somebody who was, I can imagine they went to Howard and then they went to a divinity school and they handled that. At some point, they merged all that, and that didn't go well either. That didn't, and so yeah. So there was, and I believe in Miller's Tavern, which is in the Northern Neck near Tappahannock, there was an all-black Episcopal high school too, that was run. So it's separate but equal. Yeah, these are great questions. I know I should be repeating them. Yeah, Betsy.
Do you have any idea when the seminary in Alexandria was?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I have that. It was in the paper. I want to say 19. Oh, the question is, when was VTS integrated? I want to say, throw out a number. His name was John Walker. He was later the Bishop of Washington. I want to say 1951 or so. So there's different institutions. Episcopal High School wasn't integrated until like 1969. I have in the paper too when the other camps across the diocese were integrated. In the Diocese of Southwest Virginia, I gave Mariah a book about this topic. Where she's from, their camp's controversies was maybe even more interesting than this one, and Cayuga has its own history, the Diocese of Texas has its own history of integrating camps, and they did a study around 1959, which ones were integrated and which ones were not, and the ones you would expect were not, and the ones, more or less, so yeah. Any more questions? This is great. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so the issue, the journal will be published, will come live. I'll post it and everything like that. But you have your little sneak peek there. So thank you all. Thank you. Yeah, sort of, right, yeah. And so that's helpful for our history, do you have a congregation, how does that work, Right, yeah. Oh, thank you. Was it like Yeah,